I want to help all of us understand what some of these really simple changes are. I want to help men understand and create a dialogue to potentially rewrite the narrative for all of us so that we aren't taking these changes on a personal level. Welcome to the In-Between-Man podcast, where men can be men. That's true. Please don't forget to consider signing up for our free male-only Discord server. It'd be great to see you in there. We're going to have a lot of community events going on. We're going to be doing some live streams once we get people in there, talking about more about topics that are specific to this podcast and even some more goofy stuff going on. So please do me a favor. The link is in my link tree, which is at linktr.ee/the-in-between-man. Let's get right into today's episode. All right. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about two different interviews that happened in the past. And the first person that we're going to be talking about today is a gentleman by the name of Scott Galloway, who I'm sure many of you have heard. I like him a lot. I will put a link to the interview that he had with the Diary of a CEO into today's description. But Scott is a professor of marketing at NYU's Stern School of Business. He's a big public figure. He's an entrepreneur. He's made a lot of money. And how those two things relate to his passion in helping understand why men are struggling today is beyond me. But he's very articulate and he's got some great data. Now, the second person that we're going to be talking about is a British American writer, scholar, and policy expert by the name of Richard Reeves. And I like him too. He's very articulate. He's written a book called Of Boys to Men, which is basically discusses with data how men are struggling in education, life, and even in the workplace. So he's basically written a book about the question, why are men struggling today? I think I'm going to read it. Anyway, let's dive into Scott's interview on the Diary of a CEO. I thought it was pretty good. And I've made some clips here. So let's listen to how Scott happens to believe that accountability for men is a zero-sum game, which I don't happen to agree with, okay? So it's only 21 seconds long, and I do cut him off, but I want to explain after you listen to this my point behind it. So you don't get the full context of exactly what he's saying, but here we go.
When we say young men are killing themselves at 3 times the rate as young women, we use terms like accountability or say things, well, if they just opened up more about their emotions or they need to get their act together. And that is, we've decided when it comes to men, compassion is a zero-sum game.
All right. So I stopped him there, but I think I know where he's going. I disagree with this, and here's the reasons why. Learning how to be accountable for what your actions are allows you to start a process of self-reflection, okay? And that process for men is something that most of us have never done, right? Like, we don't learn that process out of the gate, okay? And because of that, we have no foundation to fall back onto when it's figuring out what we added to a conversation to make it more, to see what your side of the street is, right? And so I don't believe it's a zero-sum game at all, as a matter of fact. The point that he's making is that in our society today, a lot of women aren't very compassionate about what those feelings are in the new, evolved in modern gender norms of today. And so because of that, he's thinking, why even bother being accountable? if you're going to have a result where you're just going to be criticized. And I say, no, we need to learn how to become accountable, even if we don't want to. And that was a point that I wanted to make sure I pointed out here, is that it is our job, in my opinion, to be accountable. We need a therapist or a family member who you know is going to be loving you unconditionally to provide compassion. We don't need to be pitied or criticized from someone who doesn't care about our acknowledgement of what our side of the street is. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Now here's another example of Scott talking about Andrew Tate that absolutely blew my mind. We all know who Andrew Tate is, but listen and see what he has to say.
Is there anything that Andrew Tate says that you fundamentally agree with?
Mm-hmm.
I understand there's a lot that you have a different opinion on, but what is it that he says that you think holds merit?
I'll go further than that. I think the majority of what Andrew Tate says is probably positive. It starts from a really good place. Take accountability for your actions, be in great shape, be action-oriented.
He fundamentally agrees with a lot, 80% of what Andrew Tate is talking about. And that's compelling. If someone like Scott Galloway is going to confirm that 80% of what he's ultimately talking about, this is a misogynistic, not a nice guy, is representing positive things, that gets me really curious. And here is where Scott talks about why he doesn't like Andrew Tate, to further confirm for him that the 20% that he added on at the end to make the full 100% is completely bananas. All right, so let's get into that. But I thought that was really interesting coming from Scott, because a lot of what Andrew Tate, 80% of what Andrew Tate had been talking about, from an accountability standpoint, is positive. That's the first time I've ever heard anyone say anything positive about Andrew Tate. I don't listen to him. I don't like him for all the reasons why we know, but let's hear it from Scott's mouth.
But it then kind of comes off the rails. And one of the ways you kind of take accountability or take action is to start treating women as property, is to sign up for my class on how to trade crypto, which makes Trump University look like Harvard. I mean, it's just, it's a bit of a grift. And I also think that what started...
A grift, I had to look that up, is a scheme on how to make money, which makes what Andrew Tate did even more worse, because he confirmed that there's a shitload of struggling men out there that he convinced to do things that men shouldn't do, that we've all seen now. But let's keep going.
Starts off as positive, and that's quite frankly, that's the most dangerous thing about it, because you can imagine a young boy, a young man, just agreeing with most of it, and so then they adopt the last 10 or 20%, which quite frankly is just really ugly. It's just misogyny.
Right? So if 80% of what he's saying helps individuals, men in particular, learn more about what it is that they can do to become accountable, then 80% of his business model is good, as far as I'm concerned. I've never seen any follow-up to that fact, because the remaining 20% of Andrew Tate's model is all about making money and sharing links and paying people and being misogynistic and doing all the things that I don't want to promote on this specific channel. So we've got to come up with what that business model is, and I think I've come up with something. But we're not going to go over it now because it's way too early. Beverage. All right. And then There are two other things that he talks about, that Scott talks about, that I think we all probably have a very good understanding about. One being when boys don't have male role models. Scott, give us a breakdown of how you feel about this topic.
If you tried to identify one signal through all the noise, it would be the following. When the boy no longer has a male role model. So the first is we need to frame the problem as this is a real issue that requires and deserves compassion and our sympathy. It's not a zero-sum game. Civil rights didn't hurt white people. Gay marriage didn't in any way diminish heteronormative marriage. And so the first is to have a conversation that this is a group that's struggling, and to stop using terms like accountability and somehow blaming them for their own problems here. The 19-year-old male should not pay for the sins of his father or grandfather.
I want to get these points out because I think it's really important for all of us to acknowledge really what's happening. And what's happening is that, the world around us has all evolved and become much more modernized to how men see and view the world. And we view the world through a traditional male value system. We've talked about it in this podcast. We've talked about and had 2 episodes of the overlooked and criticized benefits of the traditional male value system. And what Scott is saying here is people don't need to be compassionate about the fact that we're going through that. You know what? And he further confirms that most people aren't compassionate about it. I don't need to feel sorry for you, right? But while you go through this process of becoming accountable and seeing where your part is, you're taking on a workflow that is a repeatable thing. Furthermore, once you've gone through whatever struggle you have understood is your part of the process, you can overcome that, and you can actually, I won't say defend yourself, but you can create a boundary where being criticized isn't going to impact you anymore. We need to stand up for ourselves in these types of dynamics. They're really, really important, regardless of if we're going to be criticized out in the marketplace by anyone. And his point is very well taken. No one is going to do this for us unless we take the initiative to do it for ourselves. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do here. Now, the other point, which is absolutely crucial to bring up, is the fact that men are valued based on their economic vitality. And we all know that that is true. And I just wanted to point it out here by confirming it from Scott himself. So here we go.
It's especially hard on men because I think men are still primarily evaluated in terms through the lens of their economic vitality. I mean, look at the housing market. The average age of a first-time home buyer is 47 now. In 1980, the average age of a first-time home buyer was 29. Young people have been sequestered from whatever you call, loosely speaking, the American dream or the UK dream. So the odds are just the forces in the face of young men have just become greater and greater, and it's manifesting in a lot of different ways.
So I want to point out, most of you might be saying to yourself, this is really simple, this is really stupid, I already understand what these points are, but if you listen to this podcast once, you're not going to get all of the nuggets. And I wanted to emphasize today the importance of my opinion on why being accountable for your actions is absolutely vital, what you can learn from them. I wanted to point out that regardless of how you feel about Andrew Tate, someone like Scott Galloway is saying 80% of his stuff is actually really helpful to men. The way he goes about doing the remaining 20% absolutely destroys the other 80. And that I'm in the process of hopefully putting together a process that we can all use. And then the simple fact that if you don't grow up with a male role model, right, you don't have a foundation of what the traditional male value systems are, and it gets diluted, and you end up in a really bad spot where a lot of men are today. And then the confirmation of the simple fact that men value themselves from an economic standpoint. All right. So let's get into the second part of our podcast, which is talking about Richard Reeves. All right. So we're going to get into the first component of Richard Reeves's interview with Amanpour and Company on YouTube. And this was completed about 2 years ago. So you could say that it's older information, but I think what he's talking about certainly is relatable and may speak to you in a very simplistic and real way. And in this clip, he's going to be talking about the inequality that black men are facing today.
Increasingly, I was seeing evidence that many men, especially black men and men who are working class or from poorer backgrounds, really struggling in education, in employment, and in the family. And so it seemed to me that actually it's all of a piece, that in order to understand inequality, we also have to understand what's happening to a lot of our boys and men.
All right. So not only is he saying men struggling in general, but in particular, black men and men who are growing up in a blue collar type of family, that society is viewing them in a not so positive way. The inequality that's associated with that, and that happens to be something that's just out there, and a narrative that we'll probably need to consider, going forward. And I thought that was an important point to mention, especially with black males having to struggle with so much more than what I have to struggle with as a white man. All right. The next part of this interview that I think is really, really interesting is that Richard is going to be talking about some policy changes that happened back in 1972 that were written to help women with education. And his point on the matter, I think, needs to be considered and at least known. All right. So here we go.
We know, for example, that young women are doing much better in education now than young men and boys and girls. But I don't think many people realize just how quickly the gender inequality has flipped. So we go back to 1972, when Title IX was passed to promote women and girls in education, especially in higher education. Men were 13 percentage points more likely to be getting a college degree than women. So there was a big hill to climb. But today, it's 15 percentage points more likely that a woman will get a degree than a man. And so in the space of a very short period of time, it's not just that women have caught up in college education, they've blown right past. And in fact, we have a bigger gender inequality today in education and higher education than we did 50 years ago. It's just that it's reversed. And some of these statistics honestly took me a little bit by surprise to realize just how big some of these gaps had gotten.
Right? Like, point taken. Right? Like 50 years ago, 13% more men were graduating from college. It's fundamentally flipped. Fundamentally flipped. My oldest son, who will be 20 in August, did not go to college. He didn't even finish high school. And my middle son, Aiden, is in the process of working through those dynamics now. And the question we should be asking ourselves is, why is that? At the end, we'll answer some of those questions as an answer to this specific point that Richard Reeves makes in this interview. All right, so then now we're going to go to the example from an economic perspective, how all this translates to men. Okay? Richard uses in this example, if American men were a country. Check this out.
If American men were a country and we were thinking about their economic progress, overall men's wages have declined for most men. Now, for men at the top, that's not true. And so economic inequality has been widening, even as gender inequality has been narrowing. which is why I have to look at both of these factors. So I get it. I think if you're looking around elite circles, you see what remains to be done by and large for women and girls, but that's not the world that most people live in. And in the world where most people live, there are some really pretty big gaps now that are disfavoring men in the labor market and boys in the education system.
Right. So again, going back to our point with Scott, right? Like, no one in society who's going to listen to this and happens to be a female is going to say, oh God, I should really feel sorry for men. I mean, prior to that point, we weren't feeling sorry about women when we were getting paid more and they weren't, right? Like, it's just a reality. It's a new paradigm of how we're living in today's modern and evolved world. And okay, what are we going to do about it? That's going to be a question that I'm going to be constantly asking people who are listening to this podcast. What are you, person driving in the car, who just got a fountain drink at Quick Trip and is slugging it back from one job to another, asking themselves, what are you going to do? And you can answer nothing. And that's perfectly fine. But maybe the guy in your passenger seat who's newly started has a different opinion about it. And do you want to do something about it? Because I sure as hell do, right? Like, I don't like the fact that this is happening, and to men in particular. And I won't say that I think women should be punished if they're making more money, because that would just be an arrogant statement. But what I do, and what I am saying is, I want to fight for our piece of the pie back. You know what I mean? Like, this is where, it gets uncomfortable. Like, I want to argue and prove my point to why I deserve more if I have more experience. And if I don't have more experience, then you don't have an argument. That's my point. Okay? And so let's move on to one other comment, which is based on, since there were policy changes, like back in 1972, Title IX, have they worked? Richard, what's the answer to that question?
Is the advancement of girls in math, does that have anything to do with the policies and the programs that we have sort of tried to make a concerted effort for science, technology, engineering, math, and trying to make sure that girls get in this? I mean, is this a success in some senses that our intervention has worked?
It's a huge success. And I think, just to take a step back for a moment, just generally to make the point that the transformation in the educational outcomes for girls and women and the economic outcomes for women has been stunning in the last 50 years. Arguably, it's the greatest economic liberation in human history. It's just been astonishing.
It's the greatest liberation in history. That's what he said. And guys, it was time. Right? It was time. And women, I mean, let's give them some credit. They took advantage of the opportunities that they were given, and they've worked extremely hard to achieve what they've gotten. And I don't look at it as a slight, like they got more and I got less. I look at it more like, where are we at now? And how can I accept the fact that that's happened? And how can I take care of myself in the meantime? How can I be better prepared for the norms that have changed seismically? You know what I mean? I use the example, and I hate to get off on a tangent, but I'm going to. Like, if you're a prepper, which most guys are, I mean, imagine having a round of ammo and some beef jerky for the apocalypse. You're not prepared. We need to be better prepared to understand what has happened so that we can talk about it and not take the assault that I feel like a lot of men feel they're getting, as our women are promoting and criticizing what's in their best interest. Right? What's in their best interest? That's just how I feel about it. You can debate with me later on if you're wrong, all right? So the last question that I'm going to go over before I get into answering some of the details associated with education and why there's been such a seismic shift. How has this translated to the economic marketplace? Richard?
So how does this translate when it comes to finding jobs, how they perform in the labor market? Because even if there is a better pipeline today of women that are pursuing STEM fields, getting more college degrees, et cetera, it doesn't necessarily seem to still translate into a dollar earned versus a dollar earned, whether you're a man or a woman.
That's right. Well, there's two things there. This overtaking in education we've seen has happened in the last 2 or 3 decades. And so it's taking a while to play out in the labor market. The gender pay gap is narrowing, however. And in particular, it's essentially disappeared among among men and women before they have children. Not completely, but it's really, the pay gap is really now a parenting pay gap. What happens is that when we have kids, women are much more likely to take time out of the labor market or work part-time, and fathers not. And so that doesn't mean it's not a problem. It just means it's a different kind of problem. It's no longer a problem by and large of employers discriminating and so on too. The other thing that's worth saying, though, is that it used to be true that men were more able to get decently paid jobs even with lower levels of education. So you could come out of high school and still get a decent manufacturing job, say. But those jobs are increasingly disappearing. And so to the extent that there used to be a labor market where modestly educated men could outperform even better educated women, over time, that's becoming less true.
Okay, so the argument really isn't that much about payment gap, right? Like, organizations have adopted the fact that women are just as smart, if maybe sometimes smarter than men, and that they deserve to be paid equally. And Richard is saying that that gap has narrowed significantly. And I don't know how true that is, but I have no reason not to believe him. Furthermore, the argument now becomes, if a woman who has a professional career is super eager to stay at home, there's a dynamic that happens that most men aren't prepared for, right? Like, there could be the argument that I don't want to stay home. I want to continue my career and continue to make a lot of money while you do the same thing. But we're going to share those parenting responsibilities. And I don't care how you feel about it. That's just what's happening. That's a reality today. That is a straight up reality today. And that could be a very real conversation that you might have to ask and talk about. And instead of getting mad at the fact that she's not agreeing with you about staying home on a full-time basis, now maybe you're better prepared to be like, okay, that's more of the norm now. And do I want to take on some of the responsibilities that normally a woman would be responsible for on my, as part of my role and a partner in this relationship? And that conversation can be challenging and maybe very uncomfortable for a lot of reasons, because men aren't prepared to have that conversation, right? But we better get prepared because it's happening. And we need to be better suited to be more understanding about how the modern and evolved dynamics have changed for us. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Now, there are 3 things that I wanted to point out as it relates to education where men are truly struggling more. One of them is from a biological standpoint, and one is from an economic standpoint, and one is from just an overall educational standpoint, okay? So I really like this because it does make sense. And when I say biological to the men that are listening out there, I want you to, if you're in your, late 30s, early 40s, in your 50s like me, looking back now on this example has been extremely helpful because I really had no idea. Okay? And this is a biological fact that the prefrontal cortex in women matures much faster than it does in women. I mean, do you remember reading books in biology about how women are just between the ages of 13 and 14 just seem to be more responsible than boys while they're, urinating in their bedroom and don't understand why? So an 18-year-old female has a biological advantage in this area where she can be more focused, have greater goals. Maybe she knows what she wants to do when she graduates. Maybe she doesn't. But the point is, biologically, they're better off than we are. So for example, when it comes to going colleges and getting accepted, females are effectively 2 years ahead of men when it comes to executive brain function and competing against men who may be 18 years old. But really, only 16 years old when it comes to executive brain function. So we lack 2 years behind our female counterparts as far as how our prefrontal cortex is maturing, because it's constantly maturing and it doesn't get really mature until the ages of between 25 and 34, right? Like that is really when it comes around full circle. So understanding from a biological standpoint why women are excelling in education, they're just better suited for it, right? Biologically. And you can't fault them for that. That's just who they are. And that's a real point that you can't certainly argue, but I mean, you don't need to argue it. It's already been proven to you. So an 18-year-old female is far more mature than an 18-year-old male, because the 18-year-old male has the brain function capabilities of a 16-year-old. It's an unfair fight, really, at the end of the day, from a mental standpoint, of course. So, all right, let's talk about the educational system, okay? So the educational system, according to Richard Reeves, has a bias against men in this area. 60% of women are going to college, while 50% of men are going to college, but usually drop out before they graduate. An example is a male is twice as likely to get suspended for cheating on a chemistry exam, compared to a female who is less likely to get suspended for cheating on the same chemistry exam, assuming that they both get caught. So there's a legit bias in our educational system that men are going to get punished 60% of the time versus females who are going to get busted 40% of the time and less likely face consequences. A black boy is 5 times more likely to get suspended for cheating on the same chemistry exam. So economic policies, business world, have created a great deal of shame and rage for the first time in American history and European history, as 30-year-old men aren't doing as well as their father did when we were the same age. And I can tell you that, when I was, in my middle, between 35 and 45, I made the most money in my career. And now that I'm back in the workforce, I'm making $30,000 less than I made before. But those situations and that specific dynamic doesn't really have to do with a lot of what we're talking about. It has to deal with more of what I'm willing to do in the marketplace compared to what I was willing to do back then. And it's just not the same. I'm not as eager as I once was at a younger age. But that's it. So do me a favor, don't like this content, don't share it with your friends, keep it to yourself, don't tell anyone. These aren't important scenarios that we should consider as men as we continue to, roam through the streets on our high horse, screaming from the hilltops how successful we are, which is a hashtag wink wink, where men can be men. I want to help all of us understand what some of these really simple changes are. I want to help men understand and create a dialogue to potentially rewrite the narrative for all of us so that we aren't taking these changes on a personal level. We're understanding what the dynamics are and how they don't favor us. And then I want to, promote for men. I want to give you the tools that you might not have ever considered you need in order to be a better man for yourself and to be a better man for society as a whole. And that might be a large ask, but that's what I'm doing. I think I've also realized too that I need to read Richard Reeves' book, and I promise all of you that I will, as we continue down this epic road of the In-Between-Man podcast, learning more about why men are struggling today. Please consider joining our private male-only Discord server. You can find the link at linktr.ee/theinbetweenman. And come join a safe community of men who probably share a lot of the same hobbies, and let's get educated. All right, gang. I'll see you in there. See you on the next one.